all good to go.
We're good. Oh, and we are recording. Okay.
We are. Yep, we're recording. Actually, yeah. So, interesting thing. We now have. This was included in the budget, but Town Meeting TV is now helping record planning commission meetings as well. So,
Oh, sweet.
This is
Great.
the first one. We're
Thank you.
live.
Welcome.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Calling to order the Essex Junction Planning Commission meeting for Thursday, September 14th at 6:34 p.m. First on the agenda, are there any additions or changes that need to be made? All right. Next on the agenda, comments from the public on items that are not on the agenda. Is there anyone in the Zoom meeting?
Global, yes, somebody, Gina DeRossi from Global Foundries, and that's it.
Okay. And you gentlemen are from Global Foundries as well, right? All right.
Cool.
Next on the agenda are the minutes from August 10th. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
Any discussion on the minutes that we need to change anything or edit anything?
No.
All right. All in favor of approving the minutes as written?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Next on the agenda are the business items. First up is introducing Jennifer Marbl, the new city planner.
So, I was planning to have Jennifer Marbl come today, but she actually is sick right now, and
Oh, bummer.
but you will see her probably the next planning commission meeting, and certainly development review board, because I think she will have a bigger role there than here, but she has been helping with some of the analysis that you will see today.
Okay.
Great.
Steve Eustace says something about the audio. Just one moment.
Sure.
Couldn't get my audio.
I couldn't get my audio going in time to raise my hand to make a comment in public comment.
Oh, no problem. We can go back.
I didn't know if that was okay, so I'm kind of asking.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's fine.
Why not?
Yeah.
The comment I had was I wanted to check in as I see different developments being built, if there's any, with the planting requirements to ensure that they're not going to, in the future, encroach on public infrastructure. For example, if I look at the apartment building on Pearl Street, the new one, they have some small bushes planted around the fire hydrant. And, in 5 years, they're going to grow in there. And why would we have any planting around a fire hydrant? And I've seen other developments like mine where they put like horizontally spreading bushes, which then like all grow into the sidewalk, which then need to later get, cut by the public works or, I think because they get out of control. And so I didn't know if there was something for the, future for code updates and things like that could be, there could be some foresight and that kind of stuff. Because I know we usually require some amount of planting for developments and apartment buildings and things like that. But to just, everything always looks great when it's tiny and you kind of plop it in and it adds a little greenery, but to make sure that the plantings are appropriate. So that's what I wanted to mention because I saw the apartment building and thought, thinking ahead to the future. And obviously there's not necessarily anything we can do for that at the moment.
Thank you, Stephen. I know that in the most recent LDC that was approved, we changed some pretty robust planting requirements and the requirements that the property owners have to maintain those and the involvement with the I forget the name, the plant tree and
The tree
committee,
advisory
tree
committee.
advisory committee, has more input in those plans. So I definitely would direct you to the updated LDC. Chris, do you have
Okay.
any?
Yeah,
input on
I
that?
think there's also it's also a matter of staff and the tree advisory committee staying on top of some of these things. There is every development is required to submit a landscaping plan, and developments over a certain size have to have the landscaping plan be made by a licensed landscape architect. So sometimes there's a disconnect with how it's implemented. We generally we take a general look at it if it looks right and according to plans, but there are certainly things that could have been missed. And in this case, I think there might have been a last minute change to I think the location of the fire hydrant. In consultation with the fire chief, and I'm not sure if the landscaping plans totally reflect that, but we can certainly look into that, and going forward, it's certainly something we can look out for.
The hot rods on this weekend and a little bit of noise outside.
Yeah, and I was just thinking of like preventative maintenance so that you all don't have to go keep checking on these things because you have limited time for enforcement and that kind of stuff. So anyway, thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for your concern too. It's a very valid concern. Appreciate you bringing it up.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen.
Yeah, so Steve,
welcome.
can you let Chris know exactly which building that you found the plantings next to the fire hydrant? Because somebody might be able to save those and transplant them to a slightly different location on the property so that the landscaping hasn't gone for naught.
Sure. I'll send Chris an email. How's that sound?
Sure.
Great.
I'm pretty sure you're talking about 197.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the address, right near the West Street extension.
Yep.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just to be sure, there's no other raised hands, right?
There
Am I
are
missing
no
anything else?
other raised hands.
Okay. So we can move on now to Global Foundries and the solar installation presentation.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Good evening. My name is Jacob Clark. I'm a leader of the development team with Encore Renewable Energy. We're this solar developer that is partnering with Global Foundries to build these solar projects on the Global Foundries campus. With me this evening is Jeff Cram, who's with Global Foundries. He's a facilities manager over there. And just sort of a quick roadmap look ahead. I can run through these slides pretty quickly, introduce the projects, and then we can talk through the project overview that Chris has prepared, I think, if that's all right. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
So the second slide just says, who is Encore? We're a solar development company based here in Burlington. We've been around about 15 years. And the key element on this slide is that Encore is a certified B Corp, which means that we focus on like a triple bottom line, people, planet, profit. Next slide. This is the first solar project. The 45-day notices, I believe, are in the meeting packet, but this is a much summarized version of that. So this project is called Essex A North Lot Solar. It's almost 5 megawatts. That's about 12,000 panels over around 30 acres. This is fixed tilt racking. It's not the bigger dual axis trackers that you see in some places in Vermont. It's about 10 to 15 feet off the ground at the highest point, 3 or 4 feet off the ground at the lowest point. They're angled at about somewhere between 25 and 30 degrees, and they face south, so the rows run east-west. We need to have a fence around the project for insurance and for electrical code purposes. We use what's called an agricultural style fence. We can talk about the interconnection points, but the interconnections is all through existing Green Mountain Power and Global Foundries infrastructure. And there's obviously also a transformer on each site. You all can hear me okay? I trust?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right. On the next slide, Chris, is just a sort of a concept map. We're working on a more finalized formal site plan, which will be shared with you when we do file the certificate of public good. The westernmost portion of the array here shows some panels in the forested area. Actually, there's 2 forested areas. I believe that both of those areas have been removed from the plan. So there will be any concerns about tree clearing should be eliminated. And then the next slide is the Essex B1 parking lot solar. This is around 2.8 megawatts. There's sort of this array is located in an existing parking lot, and there's sort of 2 portions of the array. One part is a fixed tilt portion like the previous project I just described, around 3,000 panels across 3 acres. And then the second portion of the array is solar parking canopies. That's around 4,000 panels across around 7 acres of the parking lot. Again, for the fixed tilt portion, there will be a fence. For the parking canopy portion, there will not be a fence. And the interconnection is to existing distribution service on campus. And then go on to the next slide, please, Chris. This is just a map showing the fixed tilt portion and the parking canopy portion. The parking canopies are the ones closer to the east, to the buildings there. And then on to the next slide. This slide is just explaining why Global Foundries is pursuing and advancing a proposal for solar projects on campus. As you may be aware, Global Foundries petitioned the State Public Utility Commission for permission to operate as their own utility. They have a commitment in their certificate of public good to have solar on site within a few years. When they operate as their own utility, Global Foundries will have to comply with with Vermont's renewable energy standard, the RES, as we call it sometimes. Global Foundries is committed to compliance with the RES. They're excited about compliance with the RES. And then the last three bullets are intended to say that we think this is a really strong narrative to generate energy where it's going to be consumed on campus. We're minimizing impact to the transmission system, to the distribution system, minimizing impact to natural resources and aesthetics by building on an already built up campus. The next slide says site selection, and this is just to sort of convey the amount of diligence that has already gone into selecting the sites that we're promoting here. We've looked at aesthetics, natural resources, habitat, wetlands, streams, buffers, stormwater implications, agricultural soils, endangered species, historical resources. We've done a feasibility assessment on the interconnections. We've looked at site access, terrain and topography, etc. So there's been a really rigorous site assessment already to identify these sites as the best sites to move forward. And then
Interject with questions.
yeah, please go ahead.
Is that some of those assessments you've done is reasons why some of the forested areas were eliminated?
Yeah.
Having to do with endangered species potentially, or
Just, I think in those forested areas, there are some wetlands that we would need to cross,
oh, okay, yeah, for sure.
and we don't want to bother with that.
Yeah, makes sense. And then in terms of the historical archaeological resources, you guys had test
That's
pits done, or
that's in progress.
okay.
We'll work with the University of Vermont Consulting Archaeological Program as our consultant,
Okay.
and the studies that they propose will be pre-approved by the Vermont Division of Historic Preservation.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Of course.
So
We can go
I have
on.
a question for you while you got site selection up there. There's a lot of water monitoring going on the property. How is this going to be addressed or interfere with or add to it?
The campus is already subject to stormwater permitting. We'll consult with the state stormwater office to see if there's an amendment to that permit, whether that's needed or not. And to the extent that there is a legacy of some polluted soils on site, we'll work within Global Foundries' existing soil management plan. And if any amendments are needed to the soil management plan, that would have to be approved by the state as well. Excuse me.
Sorry, I have a question here. So this is to supply electricity and power to Global Foundries, correct?
That is correct.
What happens if there's excess generation of electricity? Where does it go? Back into the grid?
Yes, it would go back into the grid.
Is there any guarantee that that electricity would stay in Vermont, or is that up to Green Mountain Power?
Well, realistically, with the load that Global Foundries has, no power is ever going to be exported. It'll all be consumed on site. I mean, there's not
What
really,
percent-
there's not any realistic possibility for excess electricity in this case.
Okay, another question, just out of curiosity. What percentage of their power will be supplied by this?
I forget this answer, Jeff.
This is the 3 to 4% of our annual consumption. 10 to 15% of our base load.
3 to 4% annual consumption, and then
Okay.
10 to 15% on a base load.
On base load, should it be helpful
If you want,
some of the GF specific ones?
sure.
Yeah, by all means.
Yeah. Sure.
Like to try and keep it informal if you can, right?
That's fine. Yeah, of course.
It's a conversation we're having.
Perfect.
And if you need some water, it's right back in the
Thank you.
So Jeff.
Yeah, so these two particular arrays will be in the 3 to 5% of our annual usage, but at the time that it's generating it will be in the 10 to 15% of what we're using at that moment. So it's a sizable amount.
And in the interest of sort of full transparency, the plan is to build out at this time these 2 projects on the Essex campus and 2 projects on the Williston side of the campus. But this is sort of just phase 1. Yeah. We're planning for a second phase, phase 2, which would be another 4 or 5 projects spread out across both campuses, and in the end, we would get to somewhere around 20 megawatts of power in total, which would be much more significant.
That's correct. Our base load is 40 megawatts. And so if we get to 20, it'll be half of what we need at that moment in time.
So are any of the phases including rooftop arrays?
Not
Since
what
you've
we
got a
look-
lot of flat area now.
Yeah, not what we've looked at with Encore yet. I did have an intern this summer whose summer project, she did a terrific job, was to evaluate all the roofs on ours, so we could see that as a later term project.
Roofs are very complex on this scale. The roofs, these flat roofs, have typically a membrane style roofing, and you have to make sure that the solar installation doesn't interfere with the roofing warranty. And oftentimes you'll find that it will. And in Global Foundries' case, there's millions and millions of dollars of equipment underneath those roofs.
I'm well aware. My husband retired from
Okay, so
well aware. Yeah.
And I had the same problem with membrane roofing on my house and solar. So
Okay.
couldn't get it on the house because of that.
All right. So we can talk about sort of process, which is the next slide. So the permit that we need from the state is the certificate of public good, which is issued by the Public Utility Commission. And we have to satisfy all these statutory criteria for that permit to be issued. And the field studies are ongoing for natural resources, for archaeological, for geotechnical, for aesthetics. Those field studies will be converted into reports, and those reports will be the basis for the attachments to the certificate of public good petition. And at the end of the day, we'll have hundreds of pages of data to be submitted. And that CPG petition is submitted to the PUC, but it's also presented to the town and regional planning commission and a lot of the other state agencies. So right now, we're preparing the certificate of public good petition, and we should have it ready to submit in the 2-month timeframe. Once we file the certificate of public good petition, it could take 8 to 15 months to be issued by the PUC. There's no telling how long it could take, really. And then the next slide is just to illustrate sort of how comprehensive the state's review is. The Agency of Natural Resources is a statutory party to the proceeding. The Division of Historic Preservation is a statutory party. The Agriculture Department is a statutory party. And they scrutinize all of these Section 248 criteria, is what they're called: habitat, rare, threatened, endangered species, flood corridors, stormwater, wildlife, wetlands, air quality, water quality, soil erosion, primag soils. They look very closely at the interconnection studies. And they look at the economics. They look at the compliance with the town plan. But really, the last bullet is the important one here. The most important criterion for the town to focus on is 248B1, orderly development of the region. And the key consideration there is, does the project comply with the town plan, in this case, the city plan? And the city of Essex Junction has an enhanced energy plan, so they're subject to a different level of deference by the state. So at the core of the question for the Planning Commission really is, does the project comply with the enhanced energy plan? So I'll stop there. I know that was a lot. Thank you for bearing with me. Are there questions regarding the memo that Chris drew up?
My question for you is how much, when you're talking about the roadways allowing for the bringing in of the materials to set things up, how much noise is this going to be creating? Because more than likely it's going to be coming in on 117 and Route 15 and that sort of thing. With the school being across the street, and people, of course, living across the street, and it's near there, how much additional noise is this going to be, or is this going to be just standard sort of moving of truck traffic?
Yeah, during construction, we'll have less than 20 deliveries, really. There's racking delivery, which would be a few truckloads. There's a module delivery, which is another few truckloads. And then what we call balance of system, the transformer, the inverters, with some wiring. But it's not a large volume of deliveries. We've done construction near schools in the past without any problem. In the case where there are schools nearby, our protocol is to coordinate closely with the school so that there are no surprises.
Because your time frame would be either, doesn't sound like it's summer. It sounds like it could be.
We
during
really
school.
can't say at this time. We would just have to coordinate closely with the city and with the school.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. In terms of one more step for process, I mean, I came here a few weeks ago, and introduce the projects to the city council, just as a matter of introduction. And then what typically happens is, because the planning commission is the owner of the town plan, we come to the planning commission and say, does the project comply with the town plan? And then typically the planning commission will make a recommendation to the executive authority of the city or the town, which is in most cases a select board, but in this case would be the city council, I believe.
Steve Eustace has his hand up.
Sure.
Um,
Go ahead, Steve.
Okay, thank you. I had a couple questions. One, I saw you weren't going to build in the forest area, but does that mean also that you're not going to do any cutting in the forest area? Because I remember the array, I think it was Global Foundries, but perhaps it was IBM, down on the other side of the river, where they cut down a significant amount of forest to the east of the panels. And so I kind of, it would be great to know that that wasn't going to happen. Although I guess looking at this map, there's not that much that are too close to the trees that you would consider doing that.
Yeah, that project you're referencing is owned and operated by Green Mountain Power. The land is owned by Global Foundries, but it's a GMP project.
Oh, okay.
And for tree clearing, the answer is that we do try to minimize tree clearing. Encore has a commitment to plant 2 trees for every tree that's cut.
Sure.
Trees that would be a shade problem or a fall hazard will need to be cut. But any trees that are cut will be analyzed very closely by the Agency of Natural Resources for habitat or for rare, threatened, or endangered species. And any sort of undue impact to trees or to wildlife or to habitat would need to be very closely permitted by the A&R.
Sure, and I'm not just worried about, endangered species, so those are great to worry about. I'm thinking just, it's important to have trees in the community just for, especially shade on pavement, lowering temperatures, things like that, especially like on the right-hand side of this drawing here. There's, trees up against the road and, that are providing shade at least in the first half of the day because they're on the east side of the road. And, certainly you don't need trees like right next to the array, but sometimes people get very zealous and cut trees for a while ago. And in that little bit of trees to the east there, right on the right edge of the property, there's not going to be any endangered species right there. I mean, it's in a developed region, but those trees are really nice up along that access road heading up to Maple Street. And so that's the type of stuff, that I'm thinking of. And it sounds like you're thinking the right things, but I just thought it would be just good to mention as a community member that, shade trees are important, especially along roadways and visibility, from the neighboring areas.
Yeah, thank you for the question. We're certainly not cutting trees for no reason in any context.
Yep. Thank you.
What are sort of the green
Oh, those green, this is a,
circles?
those green blobs are meant to represent trees.
Okay, yeah.
Our engineers were looking at potential where there could be shade.
Okay.
So in this memo, I made some assumptions about the North Quadrant Master Plan and how this matches or doesn't match with it. Do you have any more information or comments on that?
I do, and this question came up in the city council, and so we went and familiarized ourselves with that work that came about a little while ago. So that was put forward, I think, in 2012 by IBM, and a number of things have changed since in that 10+ years. The ownership of the site has changed hands. Global Foundries is really consolidated around its manufacturing operations from an efficiency, productivity standpoint. So we've created space within our existing footprint where we have room for additional manufacturing, either for Global Foundries or for a third party. And coming out of COVID, the office vacancy rate in Chittenden County has gone up, increased significantly. And the opportunity that looked like it might have been there 10, 11 years ago is not nearly as great now. The other thing that has really changed is Global Foundries being able to operate its own utility. So because we have the res obligation and the renewable energy obligation, we now have an immediate beneficial use of this property. So we will go through and update that master plan to include the use of solar on this property as well.
Yeah, I think it's a great investment in the property. I love seeing solar go up wherever it can. So I think it looks great. I think it's great you guys are covering parking lots. That seems like a really good use of that space.
Right.
I know, Chris, in your memo, you said that there was a recommendation to draft a letter. I'm just trying to find that memo here.
Yeah, so, planning commission is, you're not obliged to take any action, but you may write a letter to the Public Utilities Commission to just kind of confirm the plan's alignment with the existing municipal plans, including our enhanced energy plan. And that's something that if you're interested, I can draft it up. And
It seems to fit. I would support writing a letter. So
Yeah, I think we would appreciate that as well. You know,
yeah,
we're trying to approach this as a win-win and a very collaborative process, and so we would appreciate if that you could draft that.
yeah.
in terms of timing for that, if you're saying that you're about 2 months out, is that right? Okay, so yeah, so the October, I'll have it for the October meeting. If you
Great.
feel like it.
That timeline works for you guys.
Absolutely. The city or the town's position won't really arise in the proceeding for a few months, even after it's filed. But that time frame does sound really good.
Okay.
One item I forgot to mention is that we will be proposing some level of vegetative screening between the project and 117.
Yeah, Maple Street,
Maple
117.
Street,
Yeah.
yeah.
That was going to be my only question is in terms of the aesthetics. If you're
Yeah.
at ADL school, middle school, or
Right.
if you're on the road, are you going to be looking at? You going to be able to see it, or is there going to be some type of?
We'll put some screening in, and the vegetative screening is typically a mix of deciduous and coniferous trees and shrubs. But the point of the screening is not to make the project invisible. It's to break up and mitigate views of the project. So that screening plan will be a part of our final filing, and you'll get it in the CPG petition. Also,
I think it's cool to have that going on across from the middle school. It's a good learning opportunity.
Certainly.
yeah,
Absolutely.
in the past, we have tried to sort of incorporate some level of, educational opportunity into some projects. So it is something that we're open to. And finally, where it's feasible, Encore is committed to installing a pollinator cover crop within the array. That won't be possible on the parking lot areas, but on non-parking lot areas, it will be possible.
That'd be great. Yeah.
So
Chris, do we need a motion to have you write the letter, or?
I could use a motion.
I'll need a motion.
I make motion to request that Chris draft a letter to the Public Utilities Commission confirming the plan's alignment with the existing municipal plans.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion passes.
thank you all for your time.
Yeah, thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Thank you for coming in. Yeah. Thank you for your time.
Happy to be here.
Thank you as well. It's really, really excited to come and share the project with you. We've been working on this for a little while, and we're glad we're finally at the stage we're getting to to come out and share this with everyone. So I appreciate your time tonight.
Great. Thank you for doing the project.
Thanks.
That's great.
But, it's nice to see somebody for the first time here putting up carports with solar on them.
Yeah.
We're excited about that.
We've been talking about that since your master plan
Okay.
from 2012, and this is the first project that I'm seeing that actually has carport. Thank you very much.
They are expensive, but they're great. Yeah, they really are great.
Well, hey, with summer's getting a little bit warmer, the people who will be parking there will be thrilled to
Yeah.
be in the shade.
Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you. Okay. Moving on to the rental registry and inspection program.
Yeah. So, we are at a point where this is almost, in my opinion, almost ready to be shown to council, and the city council is thinking about taking a look at this and hearing presentation of what we know so far and what's possible. And they kind of want us to move relatively fast because they were really interested in the enforcement position that's wrapped into this this half FTE we've got dedicated to rental registry. This is also tied together. So yeah, they're thinking of having a meeting with the Planning Commission, the Housing Commission, and the DRB all together in October to go over this and also to talk more about how responsibilities for the different commissions moving forward. I mean, it's really between responsibilities between the Planning Commission and the Housing Commission. It's not totally defined who does what. It doesn't have to this doesn't have to fall completely in the purview of the Planning Commission. It could be passed to them for further development. But I think at this point I have tried to clean up the draft ordinance. You should have a copy of it, and maybe if you have anything to discuss about that, now's the time.
Well, I do have a question. For section 20.08 B, D, and E, there's a phrase in there about out-of-state ownership. How is out-of-state ownership a factor in this? Or why should it be a factor in this?
Right. 8. So this was in reference to what the city of Rochester, New York has done in terms of how they weigh the risk factors. Out-of-state ownership just means that the response times, the responsiveness of the landlord may be lower, just because they're not around. But of course, that can be offset if they have a good property management, good property manager that's assigned to that property. But I was just trying to cover our bases in case we wanted to use that. It's really, it's a little bit difficult at this point, to without having written all the operational procedures to say what the factors will end up having to be, which would make sense. I think it's probably necessary to have some public engagement on that. We want to make sure that the factors are going to be equitable and effective at focusing efforts where the risks are highest.
I'm in favor of out-of-state ownership being a risk factor. I mean, I think you see it often, and there's probably data out there. I don't know what it would be, but absentee landlords are very much a challenge and can very much be. And some of those tend to often be properties that fall in the most disarray because of their lack of availability and lack of responsiveness. So
just want to, yeah, I understand that part. I just want, yeah,
Yeah, I know
I don't
that.
want to just feel like we're picking on a specific piece, you know, and perhaps writing something up and say there's why we're or why we're doing that.
Yeah, it could be rewritten as accessibility of property owner.
Yes.
I don't know, but I do know in Burlington they require a property manager or contact in Chittenden County that you must list on the registration.
Right.
So, like, I think that's their way of addressing. Like, if you are out of state, you have to have someone that is
That's local.
in
that
local
is
that can be contacted.
responsible for the
Yeah.
property. Yeah.
So that's a way to
Yeah.
also build that in as
Well,
well.
I
That did stand
I
out to
believe
me
that
too.
is-
I was
that-
like, that seems like we're picking on a certain group.
It
For
is.
sure.
It's. I think Rochester had that partially because it's really easy to tell, just from ownership records like that. That's an easy number to pull out, easy factor to pull out.
Well, I understand that tenet. It's just, since we're trying to be fair, and in this case, it's more of an understanding as to why that's a risk factor.
Right.
Perhaps we need to explain why that's a risk factor and why we're asking for a local contact. So that, whomever, okay, we have a lot of people who might own properties here and then suddenly they decide to get up and move somewhere else. That doesn't
Listing
mean,
them in the.
well, they have a property. Let's say that somebody has a property, they turn their old grandma's house into something else, and you know they've decided to move to Florida. Okay, you know, how many snowbirds do we know? So it's, you know, are they still a local? Yes, they're still somewhat local, you know, in that they were here, but they're no
No, I
longer
appreciate
here.
I appreciate the sentiment.
Okay,
The
so
point.
it's
Yeah,
it's just an understanding part as opposed to we're just looking at all the risks.
yeah, I think the real risk is the accessibility of the property, right? Like, all you're trying to do is get in there to inspect it. And if you have an absentee landlord that's not connecting, that's not scheduling the property inspection, the issue is that you can't get into the property to inspect it. And so that's the real risk factor. It's not necessarily that it's owned by someone out of state.
Well, I do think they're having, you know, their responsiveness to complaints directly made by the by the tenant. I think that could be affected by whether or not they're local.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is just it is a proxy for.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that if it took a year to get into the property, that's a good reason to say you're getting another inspection in a year. Versus, like, if we were able to get in there within 60 days, there's a good reason to say, okay, you're good for another 3 years.
Well,
which
the
is
way
what
this is written, I
is
don't think
saying.
they'd be able to get away with not scheduling, not responding to scheduling requests for a year. They would definitely be in violation.
Yeah. I mean,
I see it a little bit further than that, than just access to the property, but absentee landlords tend to be those properties that they're not responsive to the tenant. So the tenant would make a complaint about something not working in
That's
the home,
what I was saying.
and the absentee landlord, okay, and it might take them a month to 2 months to get around to addressing it because they're not local, they're not nearby. They might have to find a contractor, whatever, to stop by.
I get, yeah.
Yeah, I think, to me, when I read those risk factors, that's more to what comes to my mind regarding violation of history, age of the building, which would also, you know, the safety of the building. As buildings get older, they tend to be more and more unsafe, and so out-of-state ownership tends to lend itself to properties that fall into disarray, don't get repaired in a timely
Right.
fashion.
I'm just saying write that as opposed to out of state ownership, because as we know, there's plenty of absentee landlordism with local landlords.
I mean, I like your suggestion of you have
Doesn't
a
necessarily be out of
requirement
state.
of-
They could live
yeah.
in state, they're just out of
Yeah.
you know, out of the county, out of.
What would the word be?
Well, I mean, I like your suggestion of the way Burlington kind of addressed that issue of a requirement of a local contact, you know, if they are out of state. But in terms of rephrasing that, I have to think.
You know, one way to do that is, section 2003, registry information required. Number 6 is the name, address, and phone number of any managing agent. You could just have comma, something in the order, especially if the landlord owner is out of state, something of that nature. Just make it a requirement of the information that needs to be provided to the department.
I mean, according, like, what you were proposing, Bill, related to what Burlington does, would this be the place if we were to say and must be located within Chittenden County?
Well, it does say, we do have it written here
Yeah,
in
it's
section
down
7.
there.
Oh,
Number
A
7.
designated
Next page.
person within the state
Yeah.
responsible for services on the property. So, I guess, and or make them.
So I think as a matter of course, we would be in the registry collecting information on local contact. I don't think there's, like, I think everybody who owns property here and is renting it out has got to have somebody, and if they don't, this will force them. I do think there's still a question of whether or not we want to consider, like, you know, where the owner is located to be a part of the risk factors. If we want to add more risk factors to that we want to kind of have the option of covering. There's one things that are in the ordinance. It could be weighed differently, you know. It could barely carry any weight if we don't think it really matters. But if it's gonna, like, yeah, I think we would want to cover anything that we feel is important. And Steve Eustace has his hand up.
Go ahead, Steve.
I think I kind of like Diane's sentiment, and I think you just have to be careful on a straight location based. Like, for example, I own a rental property just over the line in Addison County. That's not that far away, right? So, like, wherever you're kind of trying to draw things, it's just, you just have to be careful because there's going to be gray areas. And I'm very active with that rental property, you know. So I know the concept you're trying to, because I think there is people that, you know, live in Florida 100% or, you know, whatever, that certainly they're not around, or maybe they have a management company. It's just, I think it's difficult to try and, you know, there might be someone who's not from, you know, a 20-mile radius or, you know, some defined thing that you want to do that might be perfectly fine and very involved. They have a management company, they're doing everything right. And then there could be someone local that just, you know, hasn't been on the property in 2 years. So it's hard to, I understand what you're doing. I'm just trying to say that you have to be careful.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, I think it just needs to be, I think to that point, like you're saying, I think the real risk factor is this absenteeism. It's not whether the owner is out of state or not.
Right,
And I
right.
think this in there could be picked on by
And
people.
that's why I'm bringing it
And-
up. Because the other part is that in my travels, okay, I've worked with a lot of property managers. So some of them sometimes are better than others. Okay, I mean, we can tell when we've gone to places where the property manager has cared, the owner has cared, and where the owner cares when we interact with the owner, but the property manager hasn't exactly stepped up. So, because the owner is absentee, but the property manager also seems to be somewhat absentee too. It's, you know, it's how do you deal with that risk?
So,
Property negligence.
So just to play the devil's advocate, or to be Chris's advocate for this inclusion.
Okay.
I mean, I appreciate and I agree that there's the potential for particularly members of our community who are no longer members of the community full-time or still own property here. But everything we're listing here is a proxy.
Yes.
So if I only own old buildings, I could be offended that you're going to potentially weight the fact that all of my buildings are old, because it's more likely that an older building is going to, you know, need repairs, or if they don't get repairs, be out of code. So your initial point, I absolutely agree with, that whatever we land on, it's going to be important to communicate to the public, to our community, why these indicators are being included in our assessment. But I do think, they're all proxies. And to Chris's point, we can, however many more we include, they can be weighted. And I would assume that we can adjust all of those metrics, you know, as we get more information. I think that I wanted to come back to, we're at the very beginning of this phase, or this experiment process. And I think that there is some weight that we should give to the fact that other communities in the United States have found ownership, landlord residency being outside of the community to be not a guarantee, but to be an indicator of the potential for needing a more rigorous inspection, or whatever, A, B, C, D, E, F. And so, I guess I just think, just to remind us that everything that we're going to be listing and weighing are all proxies. None of them are going to be a perfect indicator of, you know, this is the one we have to inspect.
Right, and to that point, Elijah, as well, just to piggyback on it a little bit, it's just basically making a statement to, and also go back to what you were saying too, Phil, around accessibility. It doesn't mean because you're an out-of-state, you have out-of-state ownership, that we're going to be inspecting every year. It just means that you get 5 years, your initial certificate, whatever it might be, and then maybe there is inaccessibility. You're not able to contact them. You're not able to get what you need. And so you say, you know what, we're going to start inspecting more often because we don't have the ability. And it just gives the officer, municipal employee, a little bit more of a reasoning to say, I need to go into that property a little bit more often because of X, Y, and Z.
I totally agree with you, and I think we all agree on what the intention of this is. I think my feeling is that by writing out of state ownership, it allows for opponents of a rental registry to pick on that and say the city is being we don't want an out of state property owner to come in, even if they're great at running their properties and are phenomenal.
To that point, to what Elijah was saying, should we then remove age of building as well and just say
no? Because I don't think it would. I don't think it would spark that much of a.
But I think
a fire. I think Elijah's right. I think he brought a really
Yeah.
good point, and I agree with him actually. But I don't think it would necessarily spark that fire that would necessarily come up for someone that might be anti.
Yeah,
this
but I
program.
mean, to also just limit it to inspection violation history and remove the other two.
I'm also in favor of keeping the out-of-state ownership, but also including some sort of aspect of absenteeism or property neglect, because we want that to include in-state owners as well.
So,
Well, yes, especially if they're absentee in-state
Yeah.
neglect, yes.
And I
So,
think
I agree with
I'm
you.
for
I do.
leaving this in there for now, and if we we're gonna pass it on to city council, pass it around to the housing commission.
Right,
They
have
can
that-
have their input on it
And
as
have
well.
that discussion with them next
Yeah,
month.
we don't need to.
But you know,
rattle
some of those items that you just mentioned in terms of in-state that have neglect and whatnot, that falls under inspection violation history potentially as well. Like that's a pretty all-encompassing phrase to some extent.
well, okay. So to my response to
lot
that,
there for you, Chris.
so I guess there's a lot to consider here. The way this is written, if you have to get inspected more often, you're not being charged more unless those inspections fine problems that you have to pay to fix.
Right.
But the fee comes in the registration, or in violations if you don't fix things and get penalized. So in some ways it's an if the starting point is that everybody is supposed to have their properties up to code anyway, then it's an inconvenience. It's not a cost. It's not an additional cost. But of course, there's always, when you're talking about enforcement and kind of selective enforcement, there's always a question of equity. And I'm open to
What about the
changing this or seeing what the council says.
the idea of or by request of tenant?
I believe that's in there, actually.
By request.
You know, like
I believe
that
there's-
in terms of that phrase there, right? That issuance would be 1 to 5 years from date determined by the building inspector based on these risk factors. I guess it's not necessarily a risk factor, included but not limited to inspection, violation history, age of building, or per request by tenant. I mean, that could also kind of speak to the absentee accessibility, whether it's in state or out of state. If the tenant is saying, I'd like this inspected a lot more, more often, could we go with the 2 year instead of a 5? I don't know, just
Yeah.
kind of
Complaint history.
yeah, complaints. Yeah, issuance of complaints, receipt of complaints.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I agree with that. I was thinking the same thing as that. I don't know where those complaints go. Did they go to the state? I mean, Patrick, maybe you know. Know that in Burlington, there were a number of landlords that were facing issues of complaints. Does that go to the state, or is it just something that's publicized?
I think we would be creating some sort of mechanism for complaints. Or
Right.
we would need,
Because there would need to be because you can also file a complaint about something that's like if you think that the place you're renting does not meet the Vermont rental health code requirements, and you should be able to talk to the municipality, and we can
Right.
send someone to inspect it, even if it's out of cycle.
Yeah.
So I would also point out that Rochester, New York, kind of scores both the owner and the property management company, two separate scores. So a property management company with a reputation would have that reputation applied to
It's interesting.
all the properties that they work on.
I'm not opposed to that if there was a way to do it. That's an interesting.
yeah.
That would be a risk factor. A poor property manager.
I
Yeah.
can tell you that it happens.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
It's sometimes it's a rude awakening for the
Well, these
owners.
big companies, the owners are not managing properties.
No.
They have property managers.
Right.
Yeah, especially in a large, this is not necessarily a large vacation environment, but well, some of us have
So, like,
in-house vacations, I understand. But, but let's say that it was Stowe. I'm sure that there are more property managers up in Stowe because it's a more vacation-oriented environment than downtown Essex Junction. So
You're limiting our capabilities.
for the moment, I guess I could say I'm limited. Okay. But if people want to come vacation here and have fun, let's have it. So, but it's, yes, I mean, I try to be sensitive to not having that we're isolating somebody out just because there's been a lot of picking on out-of-staters. And Vermonters like to pick on out-of-staters a lot. Okay. In fact, we have a vernacular for them, which I'm not going to repeat. So,
Got a marketing campaign.
yeah, well, yes, okay, if you would agree with it. So, I mean, it's, even for people who've come from a much higher mountainous area. But, so, but I don't want to see us isolating people out and picking on them unnecessarily just because of some of our biases.
Sure. I mean, could adding more phrases to that potentially soften the out-of-state ownership, you know, by listing things like inspection violation history, age of building, property management, complaint history, and out-of-state ownership. Does that then soften the phrase out-of-state ownership when you add a little bit more? That adds a little bit more context potentially to what we're.
It might,
Mhm.
that it's not like 1, 2, 3,
Mhm.
it's
Right.
1 through 7.
And it
It's
just
more-
happens to, and when you list out other things in front of it, that an out-of-state ownership might lend itself to poor property management, or, you know, those other things, it might soften the idea of listing it as a risk factor.
I'm not saying it's not, it's just, I'm a little sensitive to,
Yeah.
to our biases about out-of-staters.
I think this is certainly something that's valid to, you know, given that there doesn't seem to be like full consensus on how to word this specifically. Like I can work on this a little bit, but we could also flag this for
For
the
discussion,
council
next-
yeah.
yeah.
to think
Mhm.
about.
Help in wordsmithing, yes.
I had some questions on some other sections if we're all right moving on. Section 20.3.c. So this talks about prior to occupancy of any new constructed rental unit, conversion of the use to rental unit, or addition or removal of the new bedrooms and major renovations. The owner shall file a new or updated application for landlord registration. That makes sense to me. My question was, do we need to state in this section at all that maybe like that a fee might not be reassessed? I could see like if you've done some major renovations and you have to supply a new application, but you've already paid that year. Do you like? I don't know if the expectation is you would pay again. Maybe if you added a unit, you would pay again, right? Because
Well-
It's a new
per
unit, yeah.
But if you just added a bedroom or something, you
Sorry, where is this again?
section 20.03.c, I believe
Yeah,
it is.
so
Okay.
if we removed new and just file an updated application, so they put in an addition or they converted something, they already have they already have a registry. They wouldn't need a new registry.
Well, because yeah,
But this is
if there's a
includes
new
new
construction.
New,
yeah.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Or a
Or a
conversion
conversion.
to a rental unit. I'm just my thought was saying that like a fee may or may not be needed. I'm not sure if that's required in this section or we build it into the fee schedule.
I think that's,
I think that can go in a fee schedule.
Okay,
I think that's a valid, yeah, any net new
right.
unit would require,
Right, you paid in April and then in October you
you added.
added a
unit
bedroom, so you update your application, but you wouldn't be expected to pay necessarily
Because it's
again.
not, yeah, because it's not a new unit, but if you split that into 2 units, now you've
Yeah.
suddenly bumped yourself into a different category within the fee schedule, and you owe
Yeah,
slightly higher registration fee for that new unit.
yeah.
Right, because you pay by the unit. So,
Right.
yeah.
So that would make sense to have something, so that when nevertheless someone pushes back and says no,
Yeah,
Like,
I
oh,
already
yes.
paid. I already paid this
Yeah.
year, and it's like, well,
yeah, well now you have 2 units.
yeah,
Or, oh yes, you just have another bedroom on your.
Prorated
Yeah.
for what you've already paid,
yeah.
I'm sure.
Thank you for updating it. You
Yeah.
don't have to pay
Yeah,
it, yeah.
no, 20 more bucks for that extra minute.
I've got a couple here.
Mhm.
For section 20.6.e, and this is what we were just looking at actually, where we're talking about, this is more based on the 5 or less violations. I wasn't sure, are we at the point where we can determine that it's 5 or less when we don't necessarily have a inspection checklist, or are we just want to mirror?
Sorry, I want to make sure I'm looking at the right
Yeah, I
section
can't
here.
put E.
Am I on
8.
the wrong one?
28,
Oh, 20.
20.8
Oh, sorry.
E.
Yeah. This was straight copied from
Yeah,
Winooski. Well, actually, not totally. I adjusted this, but the 5 was from there. It seems to be working for them, but yeah, we also, because we don't have a building code, I feel like the number of violations are likely to be even fewer than what they see. But
Yeah,
we're picking a number, and I'm just not sure if like.
Well,
yeah, I mean,
Does
in
that
my
make
mind, the
sense?
checklist, I mean, I think back to what HUD's uses for checklists and what the state housing authority would do for any of their voucher units, and it's extensive. There's probably like 35 or some odd, and so in my mind, I'm like, oh yeah, if you have 5 or less, yeah, a little bit of leeway to say, okay,
Well,
yeah.
you know, the question that
long as
runs
it's-
through my mind is you're talking about that number. Maybe Winooski discovered that at 5, it's a threshold, whereas if you got 5 or less, it's incidental. Okay, where once you get over that, it becomes, they've found that it's no longer incidental.
right.
So perhaps, I mean, at the very least, maybe we could ask Winooski about, you know, why did they pick 5? You know, and they might say it's just the threshold number. Okay.
So in some ways, this can be wrapped into the risk factors because like the Winooski didn't have this. They don't go like they don't say we'll issue it for anything between 1 and 5 based on risk factors. They say it's either 1 year or 4 years based on the number of violations, and that's it. We could wrap that into one, but I have it kind of called out separately because like this is the more acute, immediate. Like if most recently you've had many violations, you kind of patched it up and corrected it. You know, this is just kind of a guarantee that this is weighted highly and that you'll definitely have another inspection within a year or like right at a year.
I think that makes sense. I just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page.
Yeah,
The
and
number
to your point, should we be thinking about what a checklist might look like? Is that something we should, or is that?
I'm not sure we're the ones that need to be creating that.
Well, I do think at some point closer to implementation, I think there will this this will I think this will be an operational decision, but there will be some things that I think could use input from.
Yeah.
So if I recall, one of the communities we looked at did have a checklist. I can't remember if it was Winooski, Burlington, or Berry, but I do recall that there was a checklist of violations. So it might be useful to go back and find whether or not there was one.
I think all
You don't
the
have to necessarily start from scratch.
I think they all have checklists because the inspector needs something
They
to
would
work
have
from.
to, yeah, have to have something.
Yeah.
Happy to work on a checklist if assistance is needed.
Great.
My last comment I had was on 20.8.0, which is on page 9.
In multi-unit
nine.
residential rental buildings?
Yep. So what we're saying here is that if we see a representative of sample units that we can waive going into other units. My concern with that is if safety is the number one purpose that we should be seeing every single unit in a building. I know it seems like it's inefficient, but just from a landlord perspective, the only reason I thought of this was you have tenants taking smoke detectors out all the time. I had it recently in a changeover, and it's like it's a huge safety risk, and you would want the inspector to go into every unit to make sure smoke detectors were installed.
Right.
They can take them out the next day, but
Right.
I feel like
Yes.
And I feel though, in reading it, Chris, the thought process was probably, in large scale rental properties, multi-unit, like we have here on
Yeah.
Pearl Street.
Right.
What if,
But those ones would also potentially be subject to other federal state agencies doing reviews as well. So they may be exempt.
Not necessarily. They're not all so
Well,
they
it
don't have
depends
like
on
an
the fund-
affordable
yeah,
housing piece?
funding
or-
size.
right, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
they're also like newer. A lot of them will be newer builds, and from my experience, like when I renovated my property, the inspector came in and was like, "Oh, you just redid this? This is gonna be easy."
Yeah.
Like because everything is
Right,
so
just check.
like yeah, everything is so controlled on new builds.
I mean,
functions,
and
but
not to suggest that we have checklists for checklists, but what about in a scenario like this? And this would take more thinking and probably more experience if we were to do this. But what if we had basically an abridged checklist so that you go into multi-unit inspection, say 10 units or more, you get some proportion, say 4 that look good, that are exemplary, then the inspector's able to still go into every unit, but they have maybe a condensed checklist that they're then applying. I mean, this could potentially get really complicated, but maybe there would be a way that we could not have them, unless, and not being, an inspector would probably be able to
Yeah.
comment like, yeah, you don't need your checklist, like, it's just a breeze if they're all good.
I agree, that's fine. I just wouldn't want to incentivize an inspector that's already needs to do a ton to say he didn't need to go into
Right.
units
Right.
Yeah.
on a safe, like strictly on safety concerns. Like I would want to make sure we're going to get every unit.
I would agree with that.
All right. I can, if everyone seems to be on the same page, I can take that one out. I added that one kind of from my experience with certificate of occupancy inspections. But that's a little bit different because we are just looking at zoning and I look at a few units that are representative and I get pretty bored pretty quick.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Well, there is a point though, the smoke detectors. I mean, I rented a place where we said, we can't believe that the person put the refrigerator in front of in front of the fire extinguisher. There was no way you could access the fire extinguisher. It was on the wall behind the refrigerator. Hello? How am I gonna get back there? So I mean, an inspection in this case would say, no, there's a problem here. So I mean, it's,
Yeah. Yeah, all the one for some reason become an audit. Please don't. That's kind of what this is. Yeah. Do the same thing.
Any other
Yeah,
things?
let me throw a couple things in here. First of all, Chris, I want to congratulate you. I thought you did an excellent job of summarizing this. I'm really impressed with the ordinance right now, proposed ordinance. My major concerns, again, come back to operations. You're already probably overworked and understaffed, and I'm just wondering whether or not it's realistic to consider the number of inspections that have to be done in a year. And that's not part of the ordinance, but it's just for operations. We talked about possibility of 2,000 units plus or minus in Essex Junction, which may be more than we really have, but still, if you do if you do it every 5 years, you're talking 400 units a year. That's more than one a day. So I'm just wondering about the workload and whether or not it makes sense for you as you go forward. Not something we need to discuss tonight, just something to consider. I also had one specific question. Do we have a minimum housing code in the city? That was section 20.08L.
So no, we do not. That must be left over from Winooski. Oh wait, this is no.
No, it's in 20.08L.
it's on
Oh, here,
page
here.
9.
Yeah. This has got to be the Vermont's
Rental
be
housing code.
rental
right?
housing code, right? Vermont's the state rental housing.
rental housing code. Yeah.
Okay.
Something like that. So about your point about with workload and how and whether or not it's feasible to get through everything, I have two things to say about that. There's the way this is written right now. When your inspection expires, you return to provisional status, which means you're subject to inspection. It doesn't mean you will get inspected immediately. When we're starting off, everyone's in provisional status. It could take a couple of years to get through. So there could be a backlog, but it doesn't. I think we have it covered where people won't lose their registration. But I was certainly thinking about the ability to modulate how many units you have to look at, by putting in that the point about sampling instead of seeing everything. If we were in a situation where it really was hard to impossible to get through everything, and you had to prioritize what the biggest concerns are. If we've got files that are with properties with violations that you have to check back on, and you can't even manage to get back to those in time, then you probably wouldn't want to be spending your time looking at every unit of a perfectly good apartment building that has many of the same units. That was sort of what I was thinking when I put that up. But it's also possible that if the workload is really high, if we have a lot of units, a lot of volume, and we get a lot of revenue, we just solve that by hiring another person.
Yeah, or we then have more evidence to go to the city council and say, we need you to hire, whether the revenue's there or not initially. Like,
Right.
Like there's this demonstrated need now.
Right.
Yeah.
But Chris, what you just mentioned in terms of operational procedures might be something to consider when you put those together, is outlining specifically how you would address priority inspections. So you cover yourself to a certain point, so you don't get criticized later for lack of response.
Right. Yeah. I think there are ways to have operational procedures that kind of modulate where you focus your efforts. Yeah, I guess we could, if it was really necessary, some properties on provisional status could be left on provisional status for extra long if you really needed to focus your efforts on tackling the acute issues until things are kind of settled. So yeah, that's something that can be written in standard operating procedures and defended when necessary.
So
Does anybody have anything else about?
So I have a
Yeah,
question.
just one additional.
Go ahead.
There are a couple proposed fee schedules. I just didn't know if ahead of meeting with the other commissions and the council, if we should come up with a collective one that we are in favor of, that we could say this would be our recommendation for a fee schedule if we haven't fully committed to one yet.
Well, I think it might be helpful to lean towards one, but like it's.
Well,
I
I
think
guess
we
that's
wanna-
that's basically what I'm saying. It's like a
Right.
general consensus as we discussed, and we thought that this might be the better, but open to discussion with council and everybody else.
Well, and I think some of this will have to depend on what we end up finding as the number of rental units out there and the spread of rental units.
Well, I guess as opposed to the difference between doing it by square foot or by number of units, like
Right.
based on these two schedules here. I mean, I would lean towards doing it by number of units and probably specifying per property, I would think. So even if that one table that says single family, two family, three family, you know, I might be a landlord to three families on three separate properties. Does that mean I pay 100 or I pay 180?
That's from the Rochester table, right?
The smaller of the two, yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
So-
I like the Winooski
the square footage.
fee. No, that was 115 per unit. The square footage is for commercial property.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I did like the one this with just the basic 115 and go for it.
Yeah.
Because with our current influx of small utility units coming in, you know, so that's your 1,000 foot or less, you know, I mean, it's
Yeah,
still
with
gonna take you
ADUs.
time to go into each one of those units, even if there's 34 in a building or if there's 19 in a building.
Well, I do think though there's an efficiency. There are economies of scale with multi-unit buildings. You're working with one property manager with the keys to all of them. When you get things registered, you definitely have all the units in there, and in one day you can inspect all the units. Whereas, driving around to hit up many different houses, I think does carry a higher cost. But I don't know. It's also that would be a policy choice whether or not we can
Right.
cross subsidize.
I mean, I
these
always
things.
think that's a good point in terms of that as well.
But
But
remember, they're individual owners, so just because you got 34 units doesn't mean you get them all, do them all. in
That's
this
if it's a
week.
condo, right? Okay, so
Yeah,
a
because if you
condo
got
is different.
yes, you got individual renters, okay, or as
well, I would
opposed to-
think, yeah, I mean, the clarification I think would be number of units per property. So if
per property
per,
maybe per property per owner. Or I don't know.
so I mean, but the other thing I like about the scaling of it like that is so that if you have two units, you're not going to be paying 200. You're going to be paying that smaller fee. It incentivizes density and additional units to be created within the community.
Right, it's, what is it, in B here, it's 50 per unit, and then everything over 10 is 25.
Are we looking at the same thing?
I guess this is.
Oh, I was looking at the next page down.
You're looking at Rochester.
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 Yeah, I guess that's Rochester's. Yeah, where it's the 60, 80, 100.
I think it is interesting to think about too. While Rochester isn't a huge city, Rochester is significantly bigger than Essex Junction,
Oh, yeah.
and I would just assume that there is more higher density multi-unit developments in Rochester than we have here.
How does that affect? How do you think that affects costs?
They can afford to go cheaper on.
Yeah.
certain-
Right. I guess a whole system has more economies of scale.
Yeah. I mean, I guess just to clarify, I wasn't necessarily saying we stick with the 60, 80, but
Oh,
I
yeah.
like the
Like that.
I like the tiered aspect
Okay.
based on the number of units per property to create that incentive for somebody to have more density within a singular property.
Personally, I'm in favor of a single price per unit.
Okay.
It keeps it simpler, and I would definitely go higher than the Rochester
I don't think we can afford
prices.
that. But
Yeah.
I would at least
Yeah,
stick
building
with,
blocks on one. $60 a unit.
being close to Winooski, and Burlington is around the same. Just to be, I think we should just be charging the same amount as our neighbors.
Well, they must.
I-
know that it
I
costs the
support-
amount. Sorry, Scott,
I
go ahead.
support it. No, I support a single fee. I think we keep it simple.
Glad I said something.
Honestly, if you're renting an apartment, you can afford that. No problem. Yeah. I
Not
don't
saying
think
you
it's-
can't. I'm just
Yeah.
That's just the structure that I happen to like.
yeah, well, I think a flat fee by unit though would definitely be a kind of cross subsidy for the multi-unit residential buildings, which would probably just be so much easier to inspect. Like the time you spend per unit has got to be pretty low if you're dealing with like 60 unit building versus 60 different owners that you have to coordinate a time with and everything.
At the rate we're currently building, to go into 60 studio apartments would probably be a little bit easier than 2-bedroom apartments.
Right. Right.
So I guess then, with the initial, to your initial point, Patrick, of if we're going to lean towards one of these two models as a commission, I mean, we don't necessarily, like, you could, it's sounding like we're leaning towards a single fee, but I mean, we can note in that like the commission is
There's a difference of
multiple minds.
opinions on the
Yeah,
on
like
the
it's leaning
commission,
this way,
but
but
as a
we're not,
commission,
we're not.
yeah.
It's not a total.
that's why there's multiple people on the commission. We can use the
Well,
potential votes. But I mean, I think that's a very fair assessment, that as a commission, we're leaning towards this, but there is a difference of opinions within the commission.
Could somebody explain to me what a commercial inspection would be? Are we talking about a building that's owned by a landlord but rented to a hair salon or a dental business, a dentist, or what is a commercial inspection?
Are you so which section are you looking at?
I think right there. What you,
Well, first of all, we define what a commercial enterprise is, or a commercial building is in the ordinance. But then we also, Winooski has an inspection fee in here for commercial properties. So are we talking about also inspecting hair salons that are rented by rented from an owner?
I don't think
So
Or,
if I remember correctly, there was a consensus that we don't start with that, but I kind of have it in the definitions to have it covered in case we want to expand to that in the future. But Winooski does they do any public buildings, and there was certainly talk about how I guess small businesses sometimes have issues with their landlords, and they are really stuck, and they could use help by a third party like the city to help deal with some of those issues. But yeah, like that, I just have that in the definitions to cover it in case we want to expand to that in the future.
yeah, no, my only concern is we talked about this, I think, last time, that whether or not, like a restaurant, for example, for now, I noticed that the old railroad in Maine has a new potential occupant, another restaurant. So would we inspect that restaurant, or is that part of the health department responsibility for looking at restaurants and commercial property?
But we're not including commercial properties in the ordinance.
not at this point, no.
Yeah.
Not unless somebody's living in the restaurant.
and the
Okay,
inclusion of
even
the
though,
commercial piece in the fee schedule is just a carryover from the fact that Winooski does.
yeah, okay, so we're not gonna deal with it, right?
So I guess I would interpret your question, Scott, as being, at the moment, we're looking at it, okay, as we're seeing it today. Should we remove this and put it aside until we get there so that it's available when we want to finally move to commercial properties? So that it's available, or do we leave it in there as the potential that we might move there? So I guess I'm trying to decide, should it be in here, okay, in anticipation that we may get there? Or do we want to take it out and move it there when we get there?
Are you talking about the fee schedule? or
The
you
fee
talking-
schedule for the commercial
No.
properties.
No, what I'm talking about is not necessarily a fee schedule, because I think we agree we're not gonna have a fee schedule for commercial. But in, the definitions, there's a definition of commercial property. And I think, Diane, your comment is a good one, is for public comment at some point. Does this complicate our lives or make it easier, or does it matter? maybe it doesn't matter at all. It's just a question, when I read commercial rent, it's on page 2, commercial rental units shall mean real estate units, landowner to one or more businesses to be used as for commercial purposes or as a place of employment. By having that statement in there, do we open up comments you don't want to hear at public hearings? Or do we leave it in for the opportunity to include it later? It's just a question I have. I don't necessarily go one way or the other. I just raised it as something potentially to flag.
I'm not sure. I don't find it a problem to define it.
No. I think it's
If nothing
Okay,
else,
that's fine.
it clarifies the difference between rental housing and a commercial rental unit. So
Yeah,
that there's just
nothing
that
else.
differential. So if somebody wants to say, hey, I've got my salon,
right,
okay.
which is a rental unit.
which is a rental unit,
We're just defining it.
we're just
the difference.
saying, yep, you've got one. Talk to
Mhm.
your landlord versus, or talk to the state, whichever is appropriate. And we're not doing that at the moment. Although if we start getting more comments, from commercial rentals, maybe
Okay,
we'd step up.
Although you bring up, or you made me think of a good question, because we define short-term rental unit or short-term rental. Are we saying this applies to short-term rentals?
Well, I don't know if I've made it clear enough in the text, but didn't we say that short-term rentals should just be considered rentals and go through same fee, same cycle, same everything?
Yeah, I believe so.
Same
Yeah.
concerns with same safety issues
Yes.
as
Right.
short-term
Right.
rental.
It'll just be harder to identify those, right? That's kind of what we've
Well, as part of the
Heard.
registration, I think they would have to identify whether it's long-term permanent housing,
Mhm.
short-term rental,
Right. No, we're just gonna treat a unit as a unit,
housing unit is
a housing unit, short or long, it's still a unit.
right. But when we had the presentation from the software company,
They make
they
good,
they said that it's hard to find, like, to gather the data on short-term rental units. So I'm
Well-
assuming we're gonna at some point try and figure out which are the rental units in the city.
Yeah,
yes, and there's some landlords that are doing a very good job at disguising them. Because they want them disguised, so we don't know that they exist. Or at least they used to 20 years ago.
Well, when it comes, this is one more thing that where it's just in here, kind of, because we were talking about it and because council wanted the planning commission to think about it. It could be taken out, or it could be left in, just kind of as just in case we need.
I think it should be left in. I mean, I think I understand we're talking about all rental units.
Yeah.
Short term, long term. But what I'm saying is that this goes into effect. We're not just going to expect every rental unit property owner to be like, okay, I got to do this now.
Well, we're gonna expect them
right?
to,
So
but we
we're
realize-
gonna,
recognize
yeah,
that-
but so there's gonna be
may not.
some need to go out and figure out which are the rental units,
Right.
to make sure that we're getting their registrations. And from what I've heard, it's harder to find the short-term rental units, but we're expecting to have them registered as well.
Well, I think the guy though from Ptolemy was saying it's hard to tell between a rental and a short-term rental, but you can tell if it's a rental based on ownership and like if the owner's address is the street address.
right. if
We're
they're
actually-
occupied or not.
I was gonna show you some of the next thing I was gonna do today. We was gonna show you some of the findings we have so far with that analysis.
Right. My understanding was that he was saying there's like data that they can use to figure out
Right.
long-term rental units, but finding short-term rental units is more about like going to Airbnb and like having someone actually search
Yeah.
for properties and,
And-
gathering that
And
data
the
versus
key data point that
Yeah.
he said you probably don't have that we could use would be water usage,
Oh, yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
right.
that we do have.
which
Well,
apparently
which we
may
do
have,
have.
but we don't know yet. I
anyway.
guess.
Okay.
But your point is well taken. Yeah. it's more nuanced. No.
So, anything else about the draft ordinance?
Thank you
The
very much.
only other thing that
nice work.
comes to
Good
mind
job.
is, and I thought we had, and I went through to look and see if we had an ordinance on weeds. Thought we had at some point in time that there was an ordinance dealing with overgrown lawns, but, or maybe there's just a discussion on it, but I couldn't find it. So, but in I-7, let's see if I can get back to that page. I think it's like 8 or 9.
The
Yeah,
Any-
it's page 8.
public building that is unsanitary or which is
Number 7 deals with uncontrolled growth of weeds. And what came to mind is we have a lot of people doing wildflower gardens.
Yeah.
So, and in fact, there was a discussion on Facebook about wildflower gardens, except it was all sunflowers. But you know, it's yes, that might be a telling piece, but then maybe not.
Yeah, actually, this was straight from Winooski. I first, I wouldn't recommend having that in there. Actually, I think we need to do more work as a city to figure out policy around pollinator gardens and lawns, and why we require
Yes.
manicured lawn as a matter of course. So I think it would make sense to take that out in
Take that
case,
out?
you know, we. Yeah.
I mean, because I rode my bicycle around my neighborhood and when I could tell who was on vacation, who wasn't, by how long the lawn was. So would that tell me that they're going to be insects and everything else because no, not really. It's just that it's a lawn that's had mowed for 2 weeks.
Okay, so
What if
in
we,
that vein, I think it would also make sense to take out the part about nests, because what if you want a nest?
or yeah. What if you have a beehive,
Yeah.
or what if
Right.
you are
Oh gosh,
trying
you'd
to
get
cultivate, growing a bunch
guy
of
with the
milkweed
bees,
and
the bees in the corner. That would be bad.
so what if we cut
I would just-
basically everything after rubbish?
Oh wait, oh
Yeah, that's
yeah.
what
So
I-
I
Yeah.
didn't even see the insects.
Yeah, that's what I would suggest too.
Yeah, just everything
You've
after
got too
garbage.
many pollinators on this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
Actually, yeah, I did a pollinator garden at my property in Burlington, and I was just there last week weeding, and it looked like a disaster. But it's a process. You got to trust the process. Right?
Well, the rain hasn't exactly helped the process. Okay. Things have gotten more excited about growing than they have in the past. But yeah, yes, I think it looks fine now, Chris. Thank you.
great. Now that we have that, now that we just mentioned the wheat thing, I'll tell a little story from about that. That's I've experienced. So my one of the program directors at my university for the School of Planning in Toronto, she was heavily involved with fighting the city of Toronto on the on basically their bylaws about lawns and weeds and enabling pollinator gardens, and they sued and won and forced the city to change its rules around that. So it's it's certainly something I think we should look at some point.
Yes, I mean I mean I can understand the uncontrolled growth of anything. If it's into the visibility triangle, or if it's over the sidewalk or over the street or whatever. But yeah, it's I was speaking with a neighbor today, and I said, hey, this place doesn't usually look like this. And he said, no, he thinks the couple was getting a divorce or whatever. And so it was not, the marriage was in disarray. So it was the outside of the house because they were fighting over who's mowing. So I had noticed, because it was different. that I had last been there. So, but was the property out of control? No, just the weeds. So is that really a determining factor?
Yeah, I think it
Every-
makes sense, at least for the rental registry, just to leave that out so that we cover, because we already do cover that with another ordinance. We might as well focus on one ordinance here.
All
Oh,
right.
Scott's hand is raised.
Um, I'm starting to lose the connection. It must be the other campers are streaming Thursday night football. So I'm gonna have to sign off, guys.
All right.
Thanks, Scott.
Have a good one, Scott.
Hey, Scott?
Enjoy that lake.
All right.
Travels.
By the way, Chris, again, you did a great job on those ordinance revisions, so congratulations.
Thank you.
All right, take care, guys. I'll talk to you next month.
See you, Scott. So we're talking about next steps
Yeah.
for this.
So, when when city council puts together, we'll have a special meeting that's gotta be outside of the regular, I think, council meeting schedule because their agenda's already packed. But I can present what we've done so far, and since you'll be there, you can I'll chime in as well. But we've done a little bit of analysis with the CCRPC. It's not quite ready to have online, but I can talk through some of what we found. So we've used the grand list data to kind of to figure out if the owner to try to predict if certain units or certain properties are rentals based on whether or not the owner's address matches the physical address that's there. And then we're trying to spatially match that with some other data set that tells you how many dwelling units are in there. We are hitting some of the difficulties involve condominiums. It's really easy to tell how many when something is a condominium and how many units are in there. It's hard to tell if those are rentals or not. But with the data that we have some things that we found out so far, and with the caveat that I think the method that CCRPC used so far is a little bit flawed, and that's why we're going back and doing another round. But in matching, so they basically considered something to definitely be a likely rental if the owner's address was outside of Essex Junction. I'm telling them to update that to say if the owner's address isn't right there, then it's probably a rental unit. So this is probably an undercount what we have so far. But I think so far we have a lower estimate of about 1,330 rental units. That compares to the 2,000 that the census had estimated. So that's a number of units. In terms of rental properties, we have about 300, also about 330 properties. So we got some of them with many units. I'm not sure how trustworthy this is right now because of the fact that the data on condos is potentially a little off. But we think about 85% of the units are in apartments, and the remainder in condominiums. But I think from a smell test that kind of makes sense. People who there aren't that many condominiums here, and people who buy them, I think, mostly do live there unless there's a change in life situation. We don't seem to see people buying condos as an investment over here. as I see in some other cities.
Yeah, and
So, for example.
depending on the HOA regulations, I know my wife and I used to own over at Sherwood Square, and the HOA has a limit to the number of rental units within the condominium.
Right.
So so that could also be a factor in that same point we're just making.
Right. Another preliminary thing that we think we maybe have found out is that about 50% of the units are kind of are single units. So it's not necessary. They're not necessarily just a single unit in a house. It could be within a condominium, but about 50% of them are not. Within not in an apartment building with many other units. But yeah, we are gonna come back with probably something that's more accurate next time around, or by the time we talk to council. If there's anything that you think the data might be able to tell that you would like us to look into, now's the time to bring it up.
Are you looking at address data? So like multi-units would have the same could potentially have the same street address in different units.
Yeah.
So is that one of the factors you're looking at to
Yeah.
figure out if there's a multi-unit?
Oh, because we know if there's we know how many units there are within a building all the time. That's that's in the grand list, and that's also in our the housing database. It's more figuring out if they're all rentals or if that's a condominium, and within that condominium, how many of those are.
Right, like if it's a duplex but owner occupied on one side and the other side's a rental.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you guys working with VHFA for some of the housing data collection, and is this also potentially part of the state's housing needs assessment?
We have not been working with VHFA. Actually, we've just been working with the CCRPC.
Yeah, well, I just didn't know if there was another partnership there between CCRPC and VHFA to help collect some of the data, because I know VHFA collects a lot of housing data, and would probably potentially be interested in some of the stuff that you guys are getting into.
I think they kind of use the same data, but like some of the data, the housing, the main housing data set that they have is, I think, made together with the partner agencies. But I can see if there's
Or even if they might have use for it for their database after you guys have collected it, if CCRPC is willing to share it.
Right.
In that sense, because of the way that VHFA, I know they like to collect data and make it publicly available.
Right.
It would
Chris-
just make
Chris,
their
do you,
data stronger, VHFA's that is.
Part of what I was reading with this, was about rooming houses. Some people they're not necessarily renting an apartment, they're renting a room. I know the lady across the street, she died like 15 years ago or better, but she used to rent out, she had 3 or 4 rooms that she was renting out. And the person, I guess, got lucky to be downstairs in the basement. Are we counting those?
So I don't think we have an easy way of doing that.
Yeah.
There's a policy question in that too. Like, do you need to be a registered rental property if you live there, but you are
Right, I
renting
mean,
a
I
room?
don't know that we have ADU counts, probably from the applications for getting them, for making an ADUs. The point ends up being, is an ADU that it's rent. I remember our reading about if his ADU is rented or loaned to a relative or something, and there's not rent being exchanged, that we're not counting that, or we are counting that. Because I thought if it's owner occupying, that it doesn't. In other words, the ADU is owned by somebody and they're not renting it. They've got a mother-in-law or a kid or whatever in it. So how are we treating those? Because it's
Well, the ADU situation, I think one distinction could be if money is being exchanged and there's like a rental agreement. I think sometimes like a rooming, like if you rent a room in somebody's house, there could be a rental agreement. So I guess yeah, like I think that is a policy question where we could all I could also ask some, ask Winooski and other places if they include those, but I don't know if any thoughts.
I mean, in our definition of rental housing, which I would assume we're defining that this is based on, is it says all dwellings, dwelling units, rooming houses, rooming units, or mobile home lots let by the owner to one or more persons can be used as a regular residence or as defined in the current version of the rental housing house code. So to me, that would say that a rooming house counts as rental housing and would need to register.
Even if the owner lives. So
Yeah.
I mean, I think I think it
would be one unit, I would assume, because you're talking about a single
right.
dwelling unit,
Right.
but they would still need to register. Yeah.
So I mean, that's the way. Do you think that makes sense? Because what I'm thinking of is when, somebody that's older who has too much space rents out a room.
Yeah.
They live there. They're taking care of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this captures. We can add ADU, but it says dwelling unit, and an ADU is an accessory dwelling.
Oh, I think ADU for sure. ADU is
Yeah.
a different address.
Oh yeah, what is that program name?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean-
it's where where senior rents a
Yeah.
place,
Yeah.
and they home share. Okay.
Right.
And yes, so how would a home share work? Because the person is working off the rent as opposed to paying rent.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think would be good policy?
I don't know. So it's a great question. I'm glad that we got this. I guess it depends on are we using as like our baseline this economic exchange of someone is paying to be in a space and we're concerned about their health and safety. And if that's the bottom line, then it would seem that a rooming house where the owner is living in the house but is letting rooms would be something we'd want to consider. Or are we more concerned about spaces where the owner is not present, living in the space because there's an assumption that they're going to take better care of a place where they're living, and therefore is outside the purview of what we're trying to accomplish here.
What about going back and looking at whether or not the Vermont's rental housing standards apply? Like,
Their definition.
right, like if those if they don't apply by default, then maybe it doesn't make sense unless we want to expand the applicability of it. And if it does apply, then I think we definitely should include it, right?
So we might have disconnecting things. So I'm looking at because we say it's in the rental housing definition.
Yep.
We say, or as defined in the current version of the Vermont Rental Housing Health Code. And I'm looking at the Vermont Rental Housing Health Code, which says the code does not apply to a licensed lodging establishment when the occupancy is subject to meals and rooms tax, which clearly means hotels.
Right.
But Airbnb short-term rentals are subject to the meals and rooms tax, and so there could be.
Right, and Airbnb started out as being rooms for let, as opposed to,
So
as opposed to where they
yeah.
migrated to now.
I think clearly what we mean is anywhere someone is paying to live or living in exchange, like is getting housing in exchange for something else, right? I think that's kind of where there's where that we're trying to look at for safety purposes. So figuring out how we can define it appropriately.
So, right. I can tweak it a little bit so that the short-term rental is not like it is included. But like home is that in or out?
Yeah.
Well, it's,
I
guess,
think this is definitely something to dig further into.
right.
Right.
For sure.
It-
I don't want to reference some other code that then negates what we're trying to
Right.
accomplish.
Pierce Division of Fire and Safety has a separate checklist for short-term rentals. Like it's defined, like it's got its own separate track of inspection.
Do they define that as a
Well, it was-
hotel maybe then? Like is that?
Well, I mean, I just went on to
Yeah.
ACCD's website. It was just interesting to see that. Check out the Vermont Rental Code page or short-term rental health and safety checklist from the Division of Fire and Safety. So with that sense, and the room and boards tax, do we potentially then think about if it's defined as identified as a short-term rental, whether self-identification or we figure out a way to do it, it's maybe a lesser fee and it's a lesser type of inspection, more streamlined or something based on Division of Fire and Safety and the way that they have it presented. Pretty short checklist.
Well, it could be voluntary. If it's
Should-
listed as a checklist, it doesn't necessarily mean there's any bite to it.
Well, not necessarily, but it's just, I guess, interesting in that sense, and that the idea brought up of house and rooms, meals tax, which I guess short-term rentals are subject to that. And there is pushback. This could be a potential alternative to ensure that we be like, okay, we hear you. We'll pivot to another idea as to how we can still capture short-term rentals and ensure that they're meeting a certain standard.
So this is probably going to derail us more than we want to be derailed.
Right, I realized I just
No,
derailed.
no. This is leading me down a rabbit hole of. So in looking at Winooski's example, we've already said, potentially public building inspection is the direction we're moving in, but we're not going to bite off that piece of the apple yet. What if we were to further reduce the scope of what we're proposing now to simply not include short-term rentals in terms of this registry effort, with the idea that we are going to add that in once we get the quote-unquote like long-term or traditional rental piece up and running? Or do we want to, or is that kind of, I don't know. I think given council's initial interest in we want you to explicitly look at short-term rentals. There's interest in having them be part of this rental registry program.
Well, we can definitely force them to, if there was interest, force them to register.
Yeah.
Even if the Vermont rental housing
Defines them as the separate.
code, right? Like
Yeah.
even if that doesn't apply, we can make them register. You just go through either with no. There maybe the inspection. Yeah, the inspection might not be the same, and I don't know what rules are being enforced.
Sure.
But you could certainly at least force them to register if
If they're in the ordinance, then they're
yeah.
Okay.
Put it in the ordinance.
Yeah.
Yeah, my only question is home share. How
Yeah.
are
what
they
do we do?
included or not? And because I don't know, we really talked about that before.
Well, I can ask around to see what other municipalities do.
Yeah.
Where they draw the line.
Yeah.
Because it's definitely owner occupied, and that's the reason the person's there.
Right.
Okay.
It may stay
So, I
occupied.
mean, it
Right.
may just, but the question should be, I guess, asked and answered, making that assumption that since it is, the only home share is happening is because there is an owner there.
Yeah. I guess
Or,
in our case currently with rental housing definition, it's that let word. And does
Yes,
let
right.
does that specifically mean like I'm paying you, or it's what Phil said, like exchange of service? Is that also encapsulated by let?
Yeah, because the home share is supposed to be keeping the senior in their home as opposed to, oh, there's, I guess the question could be, the senior could be renting, okay, and they just need a co-renter, or
Yeah, but then in that case, they would be
be
captured because it's a rental.
because it's a renter.
Yeah, I'm just trying to make sure that we define who this applies, what
Yeah.
type of, what property this applies to effectively, because we define rental housing, but then in section 21A, we say that it's responsible for ensuring that all rental properties, but we didn't define rental property. It says as defined in Vermont 20 section, I'm not sure how to read that, 2730. But that, if you look that up, that talks about all public buildings. I just want to make sure that we get clearly defined on what type of property this applies to.
I can clean that part up a little bit.
Yeah. And I think I just like, I know we're rabbit holing. I think that will get cleaned up in this process. I just want to make
Right.
sure that we
Right.
take a look at that, and I'm sure council will look at that too.
Yeah.
I'm sure. And if
Yeah.
our intention is to include that short-term rentals register,
Right.
then we should make sure that our definitions align.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So short-term rentals, I think that's clear. We should. I should try to close a loophole, basically. Home share. Are there opinions before I dive in and kind of ask around? Like in terms of, is it good policy to does it make sense? Like it would certainly, I think, the there's got to be pros and cons. Like cons being that in the city, home share, the idea is to try to keep things simple and make it cheap and easy for an older person to be able to stay in their home. If you add complications to it,
What if
that,
we
right?
were to include it in the registry so that they're getting inspected for health and safety, but in the
Free.
case of home share, we waive the fee?
It's an interest, yeah, something along those lines. The Vermont Rental Code does have definitions and things as it pertains to sanitation facilities, kitchen facilities, and bathroom facilities for rooming homes, and in instances, you could probably even extrapolate that out to things like home share, where they have like minimum sleeping areas, and making sure that there are so I mean, I think it'd be great to be able to include it in some fashion to ensure that the person who is home sharing isn't being shoved into a closet with no access to a adequate bathroom facility or something to that extent. But I like the idea, if it's owner occupied home share, identified as such, that a fee could be waived or something. Be interesting to see that what Vermont Home Share Vermont actually says about how they operate their program and what kind of rules, regulations they have around that sort of thing. And if they do inspections and do any kind of enforcement along those lines, if it's registered through that program.
I can actually get in touch with Vermont Home Share, see if they have anything to say.
Yeah, across the street, right? I think, aren't they? Isn't that Home Share across the street?
Yeah, I think so.
Is home share just like an exchange? Like you stay at my house, I'll stay at your house. There's no much
I mean,
exchange.
sometimes it's a small monetary amount.
Yeah.
In other words, instead of paying $500 a month, you might be paying 117 or something.
Yeah,
Like
no,
Because I would say that would fall under short-term rental then.
No, I don't think it's
No,
like a
it's-
housing
no.
swap. It's
Yeah,
more
no,
of
if we're-
like, I'm
gonna live in your house,
I
Oh,
need
because you need
assistance.
I need assistance, so the person works off part of their rent.
They share their home with somebody.
Oh, I see.
So in other words,
Oh.
instead of you having an apartment for like say $500 a month, you're paying $100 to help their fees, and you're working
And
on
you
the
help,
part.
yeah, you do some cooking, groceries, you do some stuff. Cool.
Okay. So just to be clear for the next step, are you taking our input and then are you gonna give this to council and then we'll have a group meeting?
Yes.
a combined meeting on this?
Yes,
Okay.
and but if that happens after the next PC meeting, I'll show you
Okay, the
next
updates.
version, might as well.
Great.
But yeah, along with I'll show you our findings with our initial list of likely rental properties, or at least tally of likely rental properties.
Great. Okay, moving on to the next agenda item, Housing Commission cross appointment.
So as was mentioned before, and of course it's a big commitment, and nobody wants to be spreading out your effort means spreading it thin sometimes. So no pressure, but the city council is still looking for somebody from the housing commission to somebody from the planning commission to also be on the housing commission. There's it's probably going to end up being a 1 meeting a month situation, although they previously met twice a month. But that it's not totally set at this point. If any of you are interested, let me know. I'll pass your name to council to consider.
And they currently don't have a quorum, right? So they can't meet. Is that a different?
Yeah, yes, but there are people. They would be able to meet if council confirms like 2 more people who were applying for the cab but didn't get in and said that they would be interested in other things. But council was thinking about this not so much in terms of meeting quorum, but they added to the number of seats. They made it go from 5 to 7.
Yeah.
With the expectation that they could fill more seats with cross appointments, and also perhaps with somebody from the development world. Yeah, I mean, you can think about it and just let me know if you're interested.
Yeah, I mean, when it initially came up, I did apply, but I wasn't selected while I was a sitting member here. I am interested. It's just the commitment, the new child on the way coming November, and my time is going to be thin over the next. I mean, who knows?
18 years.
Yeah. But I have a lot of interest. So I guess that's my mental turmoil to figure out. But if anybody else wants to step up, I'd be more than happy to not do it.
Well, I can see how it might fit in. If it becomes troublesome, I'm going to have to stop. No, I'm serious. I know that they were meeting during the day, which has its own fun and games.
I think we can all think about it.
Yeah.
Would we reach out to you, Chris?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
All right. Moving on to the next item, Village Center renewal.
I was just gonna update you on the fact that I have now submitted that renewal application to the state, and they say they'll let me know if they have any questions, but it should be fine. I think over the next 2 months, we'll probably also try to start talking about the expansion of the neighborhood development area, some other priorities that I want sorted out first. But throw some ideas and we'll see what sticks, and also bring those ideas back to the planning commission. A few different options of what we could propose.
Sounds good.
All right. Nothing in the reading file. Any member updates?
I sent a, notice from the Department of Environmental Conservation, ANR. They have a yearly conference, which is October 20th. I sent the registration information to us as the PC, to that address. I'm not sure how that will come through. But it's monstrous sum of $35. Which in the past I have gone and I've had the village pay for it. Of course, now it's a city. So it has a lot of environmental stuff. It has a lot of things that the state's doing. So I'm hoping that comes to everybody, opposed to my sending it out to you. I sent it to the PC address. So
I
I'm
received
gonna
it, yeah.
see if it comes or not. I sent it this afternoon, so I'm not sure how that transitions.
I got it, yeah.
Got it?
So then it probably-
Okay, so, it was I got it first from one person from the state, and then I got a reminder, so this is we got forwarded the reminder. I'm on the list.
Did you want to go?
Do I want to go? Yes, I'd like to go.
There should be no problem with the having the city pay for the your
Yeah, oh,
attendance.
that's the monster sum of 35 now.
If we can afford that.
I won't be around on the 30th, but otherwise, I think
It's the 20th, actually.
it's the 20th?
Well, it's definitely during the week.
Oh, it was Monday. the 20th. I'll take a look again.
It's usually in the National Life Building on the hill.
Yeah, to their offices. though. Yeah.
So parking hasn't been a problem or anything. They have parking in different tiers along the hill, up, the way up.
There's also a fantastic bus that
I was gonna say you can
Yeah.
Yeah.
the link.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess on that note, that made me think of the Vermont League of Cities and Towns is holding their annual town hall in South Burlington. Do they call it the town hall? Town fair?
fair.
Town fair. Yeah, I looked at town fair,
That's
and they have nothing dealing with planning. and
Yeah, I don't know.
zoning.
I haven't seen the
or-
agenda. I'll be there tabling for ACCD, but
I was kind of disappointed that they didn't have
Now with
anything.
Josh moving over,
yeah, he is.
It's not gonna be
yeah.
kind of funny. Is he still gonna be with you, or is he gonna be?
He's with,
With
our department
Burlington.
until the end of this month, but I don't think he's attending the town fair that I've heard.
So, usually there's been like at least a workshop or something for
Yeah,
kind of zoning
I was
or
just
land
trying to
development
see
or
if I
whatever.
could
and there was
find.
nothing. It was,
Yeah,
I was
I wasn't planning on going.
There it is.
I was planning to go. I mean, it's nice that it's local, as
Yeah.
opposed to being down in Hillington or something, but it was a little disappointed they didn't have anything.
Yeah.
I just wanted to bring up scheduling the next meeting. I most likely will not be available. Well, I definitely won't be available in person for we'll be meeting on the 4th, 5th,
Fifth.
5th. Might not be able to make it via Zoom either. I'll be traveling. But my October does not look good for Thursdays anyway, so I'm fine if you want to have the meeting. I won't be able to attend, but I just wanted to bring that up. You want to look at scheduling the next meeting?
I think I'm available for all of it.
I'm available on the fifth, so unless something else is coming out.
You are available?
Yeah,
And unfortunately, Scott's not here. So I would say let's keep it on the 5th. And
Okay.
all right. Any moving on to staff updates?
I don't have anything that we haven't already talked about.
Great. Well, if there's a motion to adjourn,
Make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
all in favor of adjourning the meeting? say aye.
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 Motion passes. Meeting adjourned at 8:48 p.m.